Please be seated. This morning we are in Matthew chapter 11, verses 16 to 19, and then we're going to skip over to verses 25 to 30. Jesus is speaking. To what can I compare this generation? They are like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling out to others. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by her actions. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this was your good pleasure. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You know, it's an interesting the way our lesson for this morning begins, because you know Jesus says, "What can I compare this generation to?" You know, and he says, you know, they're like children sitting in the marketplace, and they call out to other children in the marketplace, and you know they want to play, they want to have fun, they want to do, you know, they want to keep themselves occupied. And so they say to this one group says to the other, they say to them, you know, let's play the flute and dance. And the other group says, no, we don't want to be happy. We don't want to do that. And so they say, well, okay, well let's go play at funerals. If you don't want to be happy. And the other group says, no, we don't want to be happy either. And so Jesus compares that to how when John the Baptist came, he didn't come eating and drinking, and he came wearing those camel hair suits of his and eating nothing but locusts and honey and being sort of like a monk or whatever. And people looked at him and they were like, well, this weirdo, why isn't he, you know, taking part in festivities and all that? And so they were like, well, he has a demon. And then then Jesus comes, and Jesus is relaxed and happy and joyful, and he's hanging out with the people, and he has dinners, and he goes to dinners, and he drinks and he eats, and he hangs out with the sinners, quote unquote, the prostitutes, and everybody will have it. And then they say, well, you're just a drunk and a glutton. And so it's sort of like, gee, we're not happy no matter what goes on, are we? It's this restlessness, this difficulty in life of finding a way to be, of being happy, of being unsettled, not being happy in any circumstance that Jesus is talking about here. And I think that, you know, it's amazing how the Scripture can speak to us so much today in such a similar way as in such similar ways that it spoke to the people that Jesus first spoke to. Because, you know, we're restless, aren't we? Quite often we aren't happy in whatever situation happens to go on. You know, do you want to play? No. Do you want to do this? No. I don't want to do anything. I'm not happy doing anything. You know, and then we tend to, we so often find fault in so many things, and no matter what's going on, and find fault in one another, and fault in what's going on in the church, or fault in what's going on in whatever situation, and we don't go out and enjoy what we've got, like Jesus did, like Jesus called us to do. And so Jesus knows this, and it saddened him, and it saddens him to see us unhappy, and to see us restless, and to see us burdened by not only the burdens and the cares of being of what we have to deal with in work and everyday life, but also burdened by other people putting us down and us putting other people down. And what a burden that is, because there's not love in that, is there? And also it gets between our relationship between God and other people. I mean, if I'm spending all my time putting down tab, as I do, I really have a hard time in my relationship with God. And even though tab is terribly hard to get along with, I should really be trying to see the good in him, rather than all those awful things about him. Anyway, it's a terrible burden on my back to have to deal with tab. Just kidding. In our gospel lesson, so after that, Jesus speaks to me, and perhaps to you, and I think to everyone, when he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary, who are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle. I'm humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." We're not being very humble in heart when we're putting other people down or finding fault in everything, are we? But Jesus is humble in heart. He would go and hang out with the most marginalized people in the world. The lowest of the low, the people that felt most horrible about themselves. And he would party with them and enjoy them and welcome them into his kingdom, in his group. He would also hang out with the people who looked down on everybody else and were the leaders of the community and of religion and so forth. And he said, "Come to me, all of you, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light." What a relief. What a relief. Aren't we tired? Aren't we tired of this stuff? Aren't we tired of desperately trying to navigate this life on our own terms? Doesn't that get exhausting? Day after day, year after year, it's like trying to chase rabbits down holes. Going over the same old ground again and again. Kind of like a Pink Floyd song. Aren't we weary from our self-inflicted wounds when we follow the devil and the ways of the world rather than Christ? I know I am. Are you weary this morning? Are you tired? Jesus says, "Come to me." Jesus speaks to desperate people. And I think that's all of us. I mean, how couldn't we be? People like me. People like our neighbors down the street. He speaks to people who are desperately trying to find the right way to go, but we keep coming up to dead ends. Year after year, day after day. It's so frustrating. Before we know it, our life is practically over, and all we've been hitting is dead ends. He speaks to the people who are lonely, who whether they live alone or whether they find themselves in crowds every day, are lonely. I think a lot of us can probably relate to that. He also speaks to people who are desperately trying to find God and trying to be good, but they're just finding that to be an impossible task. And so they're driven to weariness. They're driven to despair. And Jesus says, that search ends in me. When you find me, that is when you see what God is like. Jesus said to the religious leaders of his day, who must have been terribly unhappy people, they tie up heavy burdens and put them on people's shoulders. Heavy burdens. And then he said they aren't willing to lift a finger to help. To many, religion is a thing of endless rules where people live their lives and under all these kind of regulations that they can never fulfill or live up to, and they're always feeling bad about themselves. They must listen to a voice either within or on a stage or wherever that says, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And a lot of people think that this is what Jesus is about. This is what Christianity is about. But Christianity isn't so much a religion as it is a relationship with a loving God who says, I require mercy, not sacrifice. It's a relationship where we know that we never have to be alone. And Jesus encourages us that he isn't going to stand over us like some strict policeman. He isn't going to yell at us like some drill sergeant or angry dictator. Instead, the welcome Jesus offers for us is to abandon ourselves into his mercy and allow him to be our companion who puts his arm around us as we walk on life's journey. Through his life, death, and resurrection, Jesus pulls back the curtains and lets us see who the real God is. What did Jesus proclaim at the beginning of his ministry? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. And in so many ways, aren't we poor, all of us? Whether it be spiritually or materially. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the captives and recovery of sight to the blind. And release of the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Again, through Christ, we are given the most welcoming and encouraging invitation ever. Come to me. Come to me. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest. Rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, what in the world does Jesus mean by a yoke? Back when Jesus said this originally, and even 100 years ago, everybody would have known exactly what Jesus meant by a yoke. Back before tractors, people used animals, obviously, to plow their fields. And a yoke would be a solid wooden bar with two things for the animals' heads to pull the plow, to plow the field, which was the main way that people would not only make a living, but be able to live, was to be farmers. And so the yoke would sit on the shoulders of the animals, joining two animals together as they pulled that plow. And there's some reasons why there were two animals pulling that plow. Well, one reason is because it would be a lot easier to pull a plow with two animals because there you got more strength. But the other reason is because they would yoke up an animal that had experience and knew how to pull a plow and be yoked with an animal who had never done it before or didn't have as much experience. So therefore, the animal with the more experience would be teaching and leading and guiding the other one so that the other one would become an experienced plow hand. So Jesus calls you and Jesus calls me to be yoke mates with him. And in doing so, we learn the ways of Christ, which are the ways of God. We learn to be gentle and humble in heart, We learn to put the needs and interests of others above our own. We learn to be peacemakers, lovers of God, and lovers of other human beings. And our lives take on a vibrancy and a meaning that we could have never dreamed of even knowing at all before. Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon me and learn from me." Notice that it's Jesus' yoke that we're to take upon ourselves, not ours. Leave that other junk. Leave that other junk away of trying to get up in the world, trying to compete with the Joneses, trying to one-up other people. Leave that worldly stuff behind. Take on Jesus' yoke, which is the yoke to love others, bring others into the love of Christ, to let others know that everyone has sacred worth and meaning and can come into his salvation and have abundant life. When we come to Christ, we're called to die to ourselves and live for God. We become united with Jesus. And it's no longer we who live, but Christ who lives in us. This doesn't mean we somehow disappear, obviously. What this does mean is that we are set free from trying to navigate, trying to plow that field by ourselves. We're saved from wandering the forests of sin and death with no hope for escape. We're saved from that inward selfishness I was talking about so that we can learn to serve God and other people freely. And we come to find, much to our surprise, that we begin to care about the kinds of things that God cares about. Rather than caring so much just only about ourselves. God's burdens become our burdens. And what are God's burdens? The burdens of others, right? And thankfully, God is in control. A person who had come to Christ and was walking with Christ said, "My burden has become my song." And what that means is that when our burden is to love God and to love our neighbor, then the burden is a joy. We find rest for our souls. It doesn't mean it's easy in the sense of what we think of easy. I'll sit back on the couch and eat bonbons. It's that serving others and loving others is a joy. It's a song. It's not a burden. When we're loving and helping others in the name of Christ, that's when we shine. That's when we come alive. That's when we are saved. It's such a drag to be caught up in self and to be caught up in judging one another. So Jesus says, "Come to me. I know you can't do it on your own. That's why I came." When we come to Christ, that's when life takes on meaning and we find rest for our souls. When we volunteer, for example, to help people with a food pantry on Monday evenings. When we tutor a child, give clothes to the needy, visit the sick and those in prison, help find housing for the homeless. When we take kids off to Camp Lookout. When we give a drink to the thirsty. When we welcome the stranger. When we bandage the wounds of the hurting. These things are not burdens. They are what brings us joy. The burden which is given in love is carried in love for the sake of love is light. Not heavy. Are you weary and heavy burdened this morning? Do you find it difficult to be satisfied? Do you have the tendency to find fault in the lives of other people? Do you spend your time complaining and being miserable? Are you feeling lonely? Are you unhappy no matter what you're doing? Are you desperately trying to find God, desperately trying to be good, only to end up in despair time after time? Do you find religion to be a burden which is too hard to bear? You aren't alone. Come to Christ. Come to Christ, all you who are weary and burdened, and he will give you rest. Take his yoke upon you and learn from him, for he is gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For Christianity is about relationship. Relationship with God and others through Jesus Christ. Allow Christ to put his arms around you. There is no better friend. For his yoke is easy, his burden is light, and his companionship brings us out of isolation and into abundant life. Allow Jesus to guide you through this difficult life. Come to him. Come to him. Come to him. As we prepare ourselves for Holy Communion this morning, Jesus bids us to come to him